Dad's wife kicked me out at 16. Last month, I bought their mortgage and evicted them. I remember the exact moment it happened, not like a blurry dream, but a crystal clear photograph etched into my mind. It was a Tuesday in October. The air was crisp with the smell of dying leaves. Laura stood in the doorway of the house I grew up in, her arms crossed over her chest. She was wearing a silk blouse, the kind my dad, David, could never have afforded before he met her. Her perfectly styled blonde hair didn't move in the breeze. I, on the other hand, was standing on the porch with a single worn-out suitcase and a backpack full of textbooks. Kicked out at 16, I bought their mortgage and evicted them. The exact moment Laura and my father threw me out is burned into my memory. Subscribe and leave a like to see where my revenge took me. "You're a big girl now, Emma," Laura said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It's time you stood on your own 2 feet. This house isn't big enough for your teenage drama." I looked past her, searching for my dad. I saw him in the living room, standing near the fireplace, staring into the empty hearth. He was holding a coffee mug with a chipped rim, one that used to be my favorite. He wouldn't look at me. He just stood there, a ghost in his own home, letting this woman throw his only daughter out onto the street. He had shrunk since my mom died, and he married Laura. He was a shadow of the man who used to lift me onto his shoulders. I didn't cry. I refused to give Laura the satisfaction. I just nodded, picked up my suitcase, and walked down the brick path for the last time. I sat on the curb for 2 hours, waiting for my friend Megan to pick me up in her beat-up Honda Civic. Every time a car turned onto the street, my heart leaped, hoping it was my dad coming to tell me it was all a mistake. He never came. Those first few years were the hardest of my life. I slept on Megan's couch, then in a tiny room I rented by the week. I worked double shifts at a greasy spoon diner, the smell of burnt coffee and old frying oil clinging to my clothes and hair. At night, I took classes at a community college, my eyes burning from exhaustion. I lived on instant noodles and the sheer, stubborn refusal to fail. I think Laura expected me to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. That thought alone was enough to fuel me through the longest nights. My mother, before she passed, always used to say, "The foundation of a house is only as strong as the people inside it." Their foundation was rotten from the start, and I was determined to build my own on solid rock. My break came from a small graphic design project I did for one of my professors. It led to another, then another. I started a small freelance business from my cramped apartment, working until 3 in the morning, fueled by cheap coffee and a burning desire to prove them all wrong. Slowly, painstakingly, my little business grew. It became a digital marketing agency with a real office, then a bigger office. By the time I was 30, I had something I never thought I'd have: security, wealth, and power. I never went back to that town. I never spoke to my dad or Laura. I built a new life, a new family of friends. I thought I had put the past behind me. But the past has a funny way of showing up when you least expect it. It was a random Tuesday just like that 1 year ago. I was scrolling through a real estate investment site, looking for potential properties for my portfolio. On a whim, I typed in the address of my old house, and there it was. Not for sale, but listed in pre-foreclosure. The bank was about to repossess it. My dad and Laura had defaulted on their payments for months. They had remortgaged the house to the hilt to fund their lifestyle of country club memberships and European vacations. A cold, calm feeling washed over me. It wasn't anger, not at first. It was clarity. I saw a path open up in front of me, a way to close a chapter that had been left hanging for 14 years. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer, Martin. "Martin," I said, my voice steady, "I have a new project for you. I want to buy a mortgage note." He was silent for a moment. "That's an unusual investment for you, Emma. What's the property?" I told him the address. He didn't know the history, of course. To him, it was just a string of numbers and a street name. But to me, it was everything. It was the place where I was born and the place where my childhood died. "It can be a complicated process," Martin warned. "Buying the debt from the lender is one thing, but if you intend to foreclose, it can get messy." "I'm not afraid of messy, Martin," I replied, looking out my office window at the city skyline. "I want you to make an offer to the bank immediately. Offer them full value for the outstanding note. I don't want to negotiate. I want to own it." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Laura's smug face in the doorway, my father's weak silhouette by the fireplace. I remembered the feeling of the cold curb under my legs, the humiliation, the fear. For so long, that memory had been a source of pain. But now, it felt different. It felt like a weapon, and I was finally ready to use it. The eviction notice wasn't just paper. It was justice. It was the final word in a conversation Laura started 14 years ago. And this time, I would be the one to end it. The call from Martin came less than 48 hours later. I was in a board meeting, presenting quarterly growth projections on a massive screen. My phone vibrated on the polished mahogany table. I saw Martin's name and excused myself, stepping out onto the glass-walled balcony overlooking the city. The wind was sharp, but I barely felt it. "They accepted," Martin said, his voice calm and professional, as if he were discussing a standard stock purchase. No questions asked. The bank was happy to offload a non-performing asset. The wire transfer went through an hour ago. "Congratulations, Emma. You are now the primary lien holder on the property at 124 Willow Creek Drive." I leaned against the cool glass, my knuckles white as I gripped my phone. I owned their debt. I held the string that, when pulled, would unravel the entire fabric of the life they had built on my childhood memories. The power of it was a physical sensation, a current running up my spine. It wasn't the giddy joy of winning a prize. It was the heavy, satisfying weight of a perfectly balanced tool, ready to be used for its intended purpose. "What's the next step, Martin?" I asked, my voice even. "The legal framework is straightforward, if a bit grim," he explained. "We will file the notice of default and intent to accelerate. This officially informs the homeowners, Mr. David Clark and Ms. Laura Clark, that the full balance of the loan is due immediately. Since they cannot pay it, we proceed to foreclosure. After that, we file for eviction. The whole process, if uncontested, should take about 60 to 90 days. 90 days. 3 months until they would be standing on the porch with their own suitcases. The symmetry was almost poetic. "I want you to use a local process server," I instructed. "I don't want the papers sent by mail. I want them handed directly to Laura, if possible." I pictured the moment perfectly. A stranger at her door, handing her a thick envelope of legal documents that would shatter her comfortable world. "I can arrange that," Martin said, a note of caution in his tone. "Emma, are you sure about this? Once we start this process, it's very public. It's a permanent action." "I've been sure for 14 years, Martin," I said softly. "Proceed as planned." That evening, I went home to my quiet, minimalist apartment. It was the opposite of my childhood home, which had been filled with my mother's warm, cluttered collections of books and pottery. My place was all clean lines, chrome, and glass. Safe. Impersonal. I poured myself a glass of expensive wine, the kind Laura used to boast about on her social media, and sat in front of my computer. I pulled up the old real estate listing again, clicking through the photos of the interior. There was the fireplace where my dad had stood like a coward, the new kitchen Laura had installed, erasing my mother's last touches. And there was my old bedroom. They had turned it into a home gym. A treadmill stood where my bed used to be. A rack of weights was pushed against the wall where I had posters of my favorite bands. They hadn't just removed me from the house. They had scrubbed away any evidence I had ever existed. Any flicker of doubt I might have had was extinguished by that image. I remembered one winter when I was 10, the power went out during a snowstorm. My dad and I built a fort out of blankets in the living room right in front of that fireplace. We lit candles, and he told me stories about dragons and knights until I fell asleep, feeling completely safe. Where was that man now? Laura hadn't just taken his money. She had taken his spine. My mother's words echoed in my head. The foundation of a house is only as strong as the people inside it. I took a sip of wine. Their foundation had crumbled long ago. I was just there to witness the collapse. I opened my email and saw a message from Martin. Attached were the draft copies of the notice of default. My fingers hovered over the mouse. I saw my name, Emma Clark, listed as the plaintiff. And their names, David Clark and Laura Clark, as the defendants. It was no longer just a memory or a painful story. It was a legal case. It was real. I clicked reply and typed 2 words. Send it. The next few days were strange. I went to work, led meetings, signed contracts, and drank coffee from my expensive espresso machine, but it all felt like I was watching a movie of my own life. A part of my brain was constantly elsewhere, suspended in a state of quiet, humming anticipation. I was a hunter who had set a trap and was now just waiting, listening for the distant snap. I didn't feel giddy or cruel. I felt a profound and unsettling calm, the kind that comes after a storm has passed and before the damage is assessed. I was simply a force of consequence, an equation balancing itself out after 14 long years. On Friday afternoon, Martin called. I was reviewing a new marketing campaign layout, the colors bright and optimistic on my screen. I took the call in my office, closing the door behind me. "The process server is on his way to the property now," Martin said, his voice flat and professional. "He should be there within the hour. I just wanted to keep you informed." "Thank you, Martin," I said, my own voice betraying no emotion. "Please let me know when it's done." I hung up and stared out the window. 1 hour. In 60 minutes, the life Laura had so carefully constructed would begin to crack. I thought about what she might be doing. Perhaps she was planning a dinner party, selecting a wine, or browsing online for a new pair of designer shoes. Her world was so small, so insulated by my father's money that was, in a way, my mother's legacy, twisted and spent on things she would have hated. I couldn't focus on work. I told my assistant I was leaving early and drove home, not to my apartment, but to a small, quiet park a few towns over from where they lived. I sat on a bench facing a duck pond and watched the birds glide across the water. I didn't check my phone. I just sat and breathed, letting the minutes tick by. The call came 52 minutes later. It was Martin again. "It's done," he said. I took a slow breath. "Tell me everything." "The server's report was very clear," Martin began. "He arrived at 3:15 p.m. Laura Clark answered the door. She was dressed for tennis. He asked to confirm her identity, which she did, looking annoyed. When he handed her the envelope, she said, "I'm not expecting any packages." He informed her that he was a legal process server and that she had been served. According to him, her entire demeanor changed. I closed my eyes, picturing it. Laura's perfectly manicured nails taking the thick manila envelope, her confused then arrogant dismissal. "She opened it right there on the doorstep," Martin continued. He said she read the first page, the notice of default, 3 times. Her face went pale. She looked up at him and said, "This is a mistake. This is a joke." He informed her it was not a joke, and that the contact information for the plaintiff's legal counsel was included. "That's when she saw your name." A small, bitter smile touched my lips. I could only imagine that moment. "She started yelling," Martin said, a hint of something. Maybe sympathy, maybe just professional detachment, in his voice. She accused the server of being part of a scam, of harassing her. She threw the papers on the ground. Just then, your father, David Clark, came to the door. He asked what was going on. She screamed at him, "It's Emma. It's your horrible daughter. She's doing this." My father, of course. He was never just my father. He was always your daughter, when I was the source of a problem. "The server said your father looked completely lost," Martin finished. "He just picked the papers up off the porch, looked at them, and then looked back at Laura. The server's job was done, so he left them there on the porch, shouting at each other." I thanked Martin and hung up. The ducks were still swimming peacefully. The world hadn't stopped, but theirs had. I drove back to my apartment, feeling hollowed out but steady. The first domino had fallen. I ordered takeout, something I rarely did, and put on a movie I had no intention of watching. I was waiting for the next step, the one I knew was coming. It happened at 8:47 p.m. My phone, which had been silent on the coffee table, buzzed to life. I looked at the screen. The name displayed was one I hadn't seen in 14 years. Dad. My heart gave a single, painful thump against my ribs. A flood of conflicting emotions washed over me. The ghost of a little girl who wanted her father, and the cold resolve of the woman he had abandoned. He was calling me. After all this time, after 14 years of silence, he was calling me because their comfort was threatened. Not because he missed me. Not because he was sorry. Because he needed something. I watched the phone vibrate on the glass table, the name glowing in the dark room. It rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, I reached out, my finger hovering over the screen. Then, with a steady hand, I pressed the red button, declining the call and sending him straight to voicemail. I knew he wouldn't leave a message. Men like him never do. They need you to pick up so they can pretend they hold the power. But the power wasn't his anymore. It was mine. And silence was my answer. My father didn't call back. I didn't expect him to. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. I went through the next week in a state of hyper-awareness, every email notification, every phone buzz making my stomach clench. I knew the quiet wouldn't last. Laura was not the type to remain silent. She was a creature of noise and drama, and I had just thrown a boulder into the placid, expensive pond of her life. I was just waiting for the ripples to hit my shore. The call came on a Wednesday morning while I was in a taxi stuck in traffic. The caller ID was an unknown number, but I knew. I just knew. I answered and put the phone on speaker, my voice a calm, neutral. Hello? For a second, there was only the sound of sharp, angry breathing. Then her voice, a shriek wrapped in venom. You little monster! You ungrateful, wicked little girl! It was Laura. She didn't even bother to identify herself. Laura, I said, my tone as placid as if I were greeting a client. To what do I owe the pleasure? Don't you dare take that tone with me, she screeched, and I could picture her perfectly, pacing on her Persian rug, her face red and blotchy beneath her expensive foundation. You think this is a game? You're trying to ruin us. You're trying to ruin your father. I'm not trying to ruin anyone, I replied, watching the rain start to streak down the taxi window. I'm simply collecting on a debt. It's a standard business transaction. You and David signed a contract, a promise to pay back a loan. You failed to honor that contract. As the current owner of that debt, I am exercising my legal rights. It's really very simple. I used the language of my world, the cold, hard vocabulary of finance and law. I knew it would be like a foreign language to her, a wall she couldn't scream her way through. Business? Business? She sputtered, her voice cracking with fury. This is family. This is your home, the home your father provided for you. That house stopped being my home the day you threw me out of it with one suitcase and told me to stand on my own 2 feet, I said, my voice dropping slightly, the calm surface rippling for just a moment. Which, as you can see, I have. You wanted me to be an adult. Well, this is me being an adult. Adults honor their financial obligations. There was a choked sound on the other end of the line. Your father is a broken man because of this. He hasn't slept. He just sits there staring at the wall. How could you be so cruel to him? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. She had spent 14 years systematically dismantling him, isolating him, spending his money, and turning him against his own child. Now she was using him as a shield. If you're concerned about David's well-being, I said, my voice hardening into steel, perhaps you shouldn't have encouraged him to remortgage his home to fund a lifestyle you both clearly couldn't afford. Your financial mismanagement is not my cruelty, Laura. It's a consequence. We needed that money, she shrieked. For the club membership, for the renovations, things you wouldn't understand living your sad, empty little life. I almost laughed. It was so predictable. When all else failed, attack. My life is quite full, thank you. And it's a life I paid for myself, with my own work. Every chair in my apartment, every piece of art on my walls, every dollar in my bank account is mine. Can you say the same about anything in that house, Laura? That silenced her. For a full 10 seconds, all I could hear was the hum of the taxi's engine and her ragged breathing. I had hit the nerve, the deep, terrifying insecurity that fueled her entire existence. She was nothing without my father's money. What do you want, Emma? She finally whispered, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a raw, desperate plea. Money? Is that it? You want money? The taxi started moving again, gliding through the rain-slicked streets. I looked out at the city I had conquered, the skyline I had made my own. I already have money, Laura, I said softly. What I want is for you to feel, just for a moment, What I felt for 2 hours sitting on that curb at 16. That feeling of having nowhere to go. The feeling of your entire world being taken from you by someone who was supposed to care. I paused, letting the words sink in. The legal notice gives you 90 days to vacate the property. I suggest you start packing. Before she could respond, before she could scream or cry or beg, I ended the call. I dropped the phone into my bag, my hand perfectly steady. The taxi pulled up to my office building, a sleek tower of glass and steel. I paid the driver, stepped out into the clean, cool air, and walked into the lobby. My head was high. The past was no longer a ghost haunting me. It was a legal file on my lawyer's desk, and the final chapter was being written. Not in tears, but in ink. And I was holding the pen. The rest of my workday passed in a blur of focused efficiency. I led a marketing strategy meeting, reviewed quarterly projections, and signed off on a new campaign. Each task was a small, solid brick in the wall I had built around myself, the fortress of competence and success that was now my life. But underneath it all, the echo of Laura's panicked voice was a low hum, a strange kind of victory music. It wasn't until I was back in my quiet, minimalist apartment, looking out at the glittering city lights, that the full weight of my actions settled in. I wasn't just buying a mortgage, I was seizing my own past. I poured myself a glass of water and sat on my sofa, the cool leather a comfort against my skin. For years, I had imagined this day. I had played out 100 different scenarios in my mind, but the reality was quieter, colder. There was a sharp, clean satisfaction, but also a hollow space where I thought triumphant joy would be. The pen was in my hand. Yes, but the story was still about them. It was still about that house. My phone buzzed on the coffee table just after 9 p.m. It was an unknown number, but I knew. My heart didn't race. It simply gave a single heavy thud. I let it ring 3 times before answering, my voice perfectly level. Hello? Emma? The voice was a ghost. It was thin, raspy, and full of a static I hadn't heard in 14 years. It was my father, David. Yes, I said. The word felt like a stone in my mouth. It's Dad, he said, as if I could have possibly mistaken him for anyone else. There was a long pause, filled with the sound of his unsteady breathing. Laura told me what you did. I waited. I refused to fill the silence for him. He had to be the one to build this bridge, or burn what was left of it. Why, Emma? He finally asked, his voice cracking. After all this time, why would you do this to us? To me? The question was so absurd, so completely devoid of self-awareness, that a cold anger started to burn through me, melting the icy calm I had maintained all day. Why? I repeated, my voice low. You're really asking me why? Did you think I forgot that day in October? Did you think I just packed my suitcase and happily started a new life because it was time I stood on my own 2 feet? It wasn't like that, he mumbled. It was complicated. Laura, she thought it was for the best. She thought, I echoed, the words dripping with scorn. And what did you think, Dad? I looked for you. I looked right past her, and you were standing by the fireplace. You wouldn't even meet my eyes. You let her throw your daughter, your only child, onto the street while you stared at an empty hearth. So don't you dare talk to me about what Laura thought. I could hear a choked sob on his end. I'm sorry, he whispered. I was weak. I've regretted it every day of my life, Emma. Every single day. His apology, coming 14 years too late, felt like an insult. It wasn't for me. It was for him. A desperate attempt to ease his own conscience now that his comfortable life was collapsing. My mother always said that a home is built with love, not just expensive renovations. He and Laura had a beautifully renovated house, but they had never built a home. They had built a monument to their own selfishness, and now it was crumbling. Your regret didn't pay my rent when I was working 2 jobs and going to community college at night, I said, my voice like ice. Your regret didn't keep me warm when the heating in my tiny studio apartment broke in the middle of winter. Your regret is worthless, Dad. It's a currency you're trying to spend long after the bank has closed. Please, Emma, he begged, the sound utterly pathetic. Don't do this. This house, it's all we have. It's all I have left of Of your mother. That was the final straw. The hypocrisy was a physical blow. You dare bring her into this? I snapped, my control finally breaking. You sold her memory piece by piece to pay for Laura's silk blouses and club memberships? You let that woman redecorate the room my mother designed. You let her throw out the furniture my mother picked. That house stopped being my mother's house a long, long time ago. And it stopped being my home the day you stood by and did nothing. He was openly weeping now, messy, gasping sobs. What can I do? Tell me what to do to fix this. I'll do anything. I took a deep breath, pulling my composure back around me like a shield. There's nothing to fix, I said, my voice flat and final. This isn't a negotiation. It's a business transaction, remember? I bought your debt. You have 90 days to vacate the property. Or, to be more precise, you now have 89. I ended the call before he could say another word. I placed the phone back on the table, my hand not shaking in the slightest. The hollow feeling was gone. In its place was a quiet, resolute certainty. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about reclaiming the silence he had left me in. It was about him finally hearing me. The silence that followed the call was profound. It wasn't empty. It was full of everything I had left unsaid for 14 years. For a moment, I just sat there in my office, the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. This life I had built for myself, brick by painful brick, felt solid beneath me. The chair was leather, the desk was mahogany, and the victory was mine. I didn't feel triumphant or joyful. I felt balanced. The scales that had been tipped against me for so long had finally leveled out. My peace lasted exactly 7 minutes. My phone buzzed again, this time with a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was. I let it ring 3 times before answering, putting it on speakerphone. What do you think you're doing? Laura's voice shrieked through the phone, so high-pitched it was almost a whistle. There was none of my father's pathetic pleading. This was pure, uncut rage. Laura, I said, my tone even. I'm conducting a business transaction. I assume David told you. Business? You call this business? You malicious little brat, after everything we did for you. She was pacing. I could hear the sharp click of her heels on their hardwood floors. The same floors she'd had installed a year after I left, ripping out the carpet my mother had loved. I almost laughed. Everything you did for me? You mean kicking a 16-year-old girl out with 1 suitcase and $50 to her name? That's a strange definition of charity. It was tough love, she screeched. We were trying to make you independent. Not that you would understand gratitude. You were always a difficult, ungrateful child. Your father was too soft on you, but I knew what you needed. The memory of my first apartment flashed in my mind. It was a single room in a rundown building in the worst part of town. The window was cracked and sealed with duct tape, and the radiator clanked all night but produced no heat. I used to sleep in my coat, dreaming of the warm bed I'd grown up in. I remembered a specific night when I had nothing to eat but a packet of crackers, and I cried myself to sleep from hunger and cold. What I needed, Laura, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, was a parent. What I got was a lesson in survival. So in a way, you're right. You did make me independent. You taught me that the only person I can ever truly rely on is myself. So thank you for the lesson. Now I'm putting it to good use. You can't do this, she sobbed, but her sobs were theatrical, full of anger, not sadness. This is my home. I decorated it. My friends come here. What will I tell them? That was Laura in a nutshell. Not where will we live, but what will my friends think? Her entire world was a stage, and she was losing her set. I don't know, Laura, I said, picking up a pen from my desk and examining it. You could try telling them the truth, that you threw your husband's daughter out, and 14 years later she came back to collect the debt. It's quite a story. Maybe they'll be impressed by my independence. Your father is a broken man because of you, she screamed. He hasn't stopped crying since he got off the phone. My father has been a broken man since the day he let you walk all over him and his responsibilities, I countered. His tears are 14 years too late. They won't pay the mortgage. There was a pause, and I could hear her breathing heavily, searching for a new line of attack. We'll get a lawyer, she hissed. We'll fight this. You won't get away with it. You should get a lawyer, I agreed calmly. I have one. His name is Mr. Harris. He's very good. He'll be sending over the official paperwork tomorrow. It will explain the eviction process in detail. Your lawyer can call his lawyer. That's how these things work. By turning it into a sterile, procedural matter, I was taking away her power. She couldn't scream her way out of a legal process. She couldn't manipulate a contract. My mother always said a house is just walls, but a home is built with love. They had a beautiful house, but they had built it on a foundation of cruelty. And now, the walls were coming down. You're a monster, Emma, she whispered, her voice full of venom. No, Laura, I said, and for the first time, a real emotion crept into my voice. Not anger, but a deep, settled certainty. I'm a homeowner, and you're a tenant who is behind on her rent. You have 89 days. I hung up before she could respond. This time, the silence felt different. It wasn't just balanced, it was clean. The last vestiges of their ghosts had been swept away. The fight wasn't over, I knew that. But I had survived the first winter in that freezing apartment. I could certainly survive Laura's hysterics. The next 89 days were going to be very interesting. The 89 days began with a week of profound silence. I expected screaming voicemails, angry texts, maybe even a dramatic appearance at my office. I got nothing. It was an eerie quiet, the kind that precedes a storm. I spent the week going through the motions, work, gym, cooking dinner for one in my small but clean apartment. Every night, I'd look at the framed photo on my nightstand. It was of my mother and me at a county fair, both of us laughing with candy floss stuck to our cheeks. She was the one who taught me about strength, not as an absence of fear, but as the act of doing what's right even when your hands are shaking. My father, David, was the one who broke the silence. He called on a Sunday afternoon. His name flashed on my screen, and for a moment I was 16 again, hoping he'd call to say it was all a mistake and I could come home. I let it ring 3 times before answering, my voice intentionally flat. Hello? Emma, it's Dad, he said, his voice raspy, as if he hadn't used it in days. I know, I replied. I didn't offer him an opening. I just waited. Laura told me what you've done, he stammered. The house. Honey, you can't. That's our home. Laura spat lies, and my dad stood by, a ghost. What would you do standing on that curb, suitcase in hand? Comment your thoughts and share this betrayal. Our home. The words twisted something inside me. It was my home, too, I said, keeping my tone level, until I was told it wasn't big enough for me. He sighed, a long, weary sound that he had perfected over the years. It was the sound of surrender. She was stressed, Emma. You were a difficult teenager. I was grieving my mother, I said, my voice cracking for a second before I reined it in. And you were letting your new wife erase every trace of her from that house, and then you let her erase me. Was that stressful for you, Dad? Please, he whispered. Don't do this. Think about all the good times we had in that house. Remember when I built you that treehouse in the old oak tree? We spent a whole summer on it. He was reaching for memories, trying to find a version of me that was still his little girl, one who could be swayed by a reminder of a happier past. But he didn't understand. He and Laura hadn't just thrown me out. They had burned down the whole forest of my childhood. There was no treehouse to return to. I remember, I said, and my voice was cold now, a perfect shield. I also remember sitting in that treehouse the day after you told me you were marrying Laura, crying because I knew I was losing you. You never came to check on me, not once. I paused. The bank owns the mortgage, Dad. I am the bank. This is business. It's not business, it's family. He raised his voice, a rare flash of the man he used to be. You and Laura taught me it was business 14 years ago, I said. When you decided I was a bad investment. The eviction stands. You have 82 days left. I hung up before he could respond, my hand trembling. Talking to him was 1,000 times harder than talking to Laura. Her cruelty was simple. His weakness was a complicated poison. The next day, Mr. Harris called me. Good morning, Emma. As expected, we've received a letter from your father and Laura's legal counsel. That was fast, I said, pulling into my office parking lot. They're not wasting time, Mr. Harris said. His voice was always calm, a steady anchor in this emotional sea. They're trying to build a case for predatory acquisition. They're claiming you took advantage of your father's fragile emotional state to purchase the debt, and that your actions are driven by personal vindictiveness, not sound financial practice. I almost laughed. Fragile emotional state? He was fragile when he let her kick me out. Now it's just convenient, and of course it's vindictive. What's their point? It's a weak angle and it won't hold up, but it's designed to do one thing: drag this out. They'll file motions, request depositions. They want to make this so expensive and emotionally draining for you that you'll give up and renegotiate the terms. I thought about my first apartment, the one with the broken heater where I'd wrap myself in 3 layers of blankets to study. I thought about working 2 jobs to get through community college. I thought about all the holidays I spent alone. Draining? They had no idea what draining was. They've fundamentally misunderstood who they're dealing with, Mr. Harris, I said. My mother always said that a foundation built on someone else's tears will always crumble. For 14 years, Laura and my father had lived in a beautiful house built on the foundation of my abandonment. They thought the structure was sound. They never thought to check for cracks. That's what I presumed, he said, a hint of approval in his tone. So, how do you want to proceed? With everything we've got, I said, turning off the car engine. Don't hold back. They wanted me to stand on my own 2 feet. They're about to find out just how strong I am on them. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The 16-year-old girl with the worn-out suitcase was gone. In her place was a woman who owned the bank. And the bank, as they were about to learn, never loses. The legal process started to move, not like a river, but like thick, slow-moving mud. Their lawyers filed a motion to dismiss, which Mr. Harris told me was standard procedure and would be denied. It was. Then they filed a request for discovery, demanding years of my financial records, business communications, anything they could dig through to find a shred of evidence that I was financially unstable or acting irrationally. They're on a fishing expedition, Emma, Mr. Harris explained over the phone one afternoon. They're hoping to find something, anything, they can use to paint you as reckless, but their primary goal is to make this process as painful and expensive for you as possible. The next step will be depositions. I have nothing to hide, I said, staring out my office window at the city below. My company had just secured a major contract, and I was looking at the building we were acquiring. My building. Let them look. What do they want in the depositions? You, he said simply. They want to put you in a room for 8 hours and ask you about every moment of your life. They'll ask about your mother. They'll ask about the day you left home. They'll try to twist your grief and your ambition into something ugly. They want you to break down. They want a soundbite of you crying or yelling that they can play in court. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach, but my voice was steady when I replied. When do they want to do it? I can push it back a few weeks, he offered. No, I said. Schedule it for as soon as possible. The longer this drags on, the more they'll think their strategy is working. We scheduled it for the following Tuesday. For the rest of the week, I worked with a relentless focus, burying myself in projections and reports. I didn't want to think about that room, about a stranger asking me to describe the color of the suitcase I'd packed when I was 16. On Friday evening, I was the last one in the office. The sky outside was turning a deep, bruised purple. I was reviewing the final details of the acquisition when I heard a commotion at the front desk. My assistant, Kelly, had gone home, so it was just the evening security guard, an older man named Harold. Ma'am, you can't go back there, I heard Harold say, his voice polite but firm. Get your hands off me. I know my way, a sharp, familiar voice replied. My office door swung open, and Laura stood there, perfectly framed in the doorway. She was older, of course, but she wore her age like an expensive coat. Her face was tight with anger, her designer handbag clutched in her hand like a weapon. Harold appeared behind her, looking apologetic. I'm so sorry, Ms. Emma. She just pushed right past me. It's all right, Harold. I'll handle it, I said calmly. He nodded and retreated, leaving the door slightly ajar. I didn't stand up. I leaned back in my leather chair, the chair I had paid for in the office I had built. I gestured to the visitor's chair opposite my desk. Laura, this is a surprise. You know, most people call to make an appointment. She ignored the chair and walked toward my desk, her heels clicking aggressively on the polished hardwood floor. She placed her palms flat on the wood, leaning forward. She smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. You need to stop this, Emma, she said, her voice a low hiss. This has gone on long enough. You're hurting your father. My father hurt himself when he stood by and watched you throw his daughter out of her home, I replied, my tone even. This is just the consequence of that decision. It's business. Business? She scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Don't be ridiculous. You're doing this for revenge. You were always such a dramatic, vindictive child. You haven't changed at all. I picked up a pen from my desk, turning it over in my fingers. You're right. It is revenge. And you and David are the ones who taught me how. You made a calculated decision that I was more trouble than I was worth. I've just made a new calculation. Her mask of composure finally cracked. Her face twisted into a snarl. You think you're so powerful in your big office with your fancy company. But you're nothing. You're just a sad, lonely little girl who never got over her mother dying. The mention of my mother was the spark, but I didn't let the fire show. I kept my voice ice cold. Do not speak about my mother. Why not? Laura taunted, her eyes gleaming. She was weak, just like your father. She let life walk all over her. I saved him from that. I gave him a better life, a beautiful home, the home you are trying to steal from us. That was it. The final confirmation that she felt nothing. No remorse, no guilt. She saw my mother's kindness as weakness, and her own cruelty as strength. She had built her entire life on someone else's pain and called it success. I stood up slowly, my 5'7" frame suddenly feeling much taller than her. I walked around the desk until I was standing directly in front of her. She had to tilt her head back to look at me. My mother, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, taught me many things. She taught me about kindness and strength. And she always used to say that a foundation built on someone else's tears will always crumble. You and my father built your happy life on my tears, Laura. Can you feel the ground starting to shake yet? Her face went pale. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. She had come here expecting to intimidate a little girl, but she had found a woman who owned her debt. I walked to my office door and opened it fully. Harold, I called out. Could you please escort this woman out of the building? She's trespassing. Laura stared at me, speechless as Harold walked over. She looked from me to him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Then, with a final glare filled with pure hatred, she turned and let Harold lead her away. I watched her go, her proud shoulders finally slumped in defeat. The bank never loses. And today, the eviction had truly begun. After Harold closed the door behind Laura, the silence in my office felt heavy, like the air before a storm. I stood there for a long moment, my hand still on the back of my chair. I had imagined that confrontation 1,000 times over the years. In some versions, I yelled. In others, I cried. But in the end, I had done neither. I had simply stated facts. The fact that they owed money. The fact that the bank, which was now me, was collecting. The fact that their foundation, built on my 16-year-old self's tears, was finally starting to crumble. I walked over to my window, which overlooked the bustling city streets 30 floors below. Tiny cars and people moved with purpose, each in their own world, unaware of the quiet war I had just officially declared. I didn't feel the triumphant joy I expected. Instead, I felt a cold, quiet sense of resolution. This wasn't about a feeling. It was about an outcome. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer, Richard. It's done, I said when he answered. She came to my office. The meeting went as we anticipated. Are you all right, Emma? Richard's voice was calm and steady, the reason I'd hired him. He never got emotional. I'm fine, I said, and I was surprised to find it was true. Proceed with the next step. Have the official notice served this afternoon. I want it on their door before dinner. Consider it done, he replied. They'll have 72 hours to respond, but their options are non-existent. The debt is ironclad. We hung up, and I spent the rest of the afternoon in meetings, my mind a fortress of spreadsheets and profit margins. But as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I couldn't resist. I got in my car and drove. I didn't go to my own apartment. I drove to the suburbs, to the tree-lined street I knew better than any other. I parked a block away from the house just as it was getting dark. And there it was. A bright white envelope, taped securely to the center of the dark oak door I used to run through without a care in the world. The first official blow. The bank was repossessing the property. My phone buzzed in my hand just as I was about to drive away. The caller ID read, Dad. My heart gave a painful lurch, a ghost of the girl who would have done anything to see that name flash on her screen. I let it ring 3 times before I answered, putting the call on speaker. Emma? His voice was shaky, laced with a panic I had never heard from him before. Hello, David? I said, my tone neutral. I refused to call him Dad. He hadn't been one in a very long time. What is this? This letter on our door? Laura is hysterical. It says we have to be out. It says the bank is taking the house. This has to be a mistake, honey. Honey. The word was like acid. It's not a mistake, I said calmly. It's a foreclosure notice. You and Laura haven't made a mortgage payment in over 6 months. I believe the bank sent multiple warnings before escalating the matter. But we were going to catch up. We just had a few bad months, he stammered, his voice cracking. Can't you talk to them? You're good with business stuff. Can you call the bank for your old dad? Please, Emma. This is our home. Our home. Not my home. Never my home. Not since he stood by and watched Laura kick me out. I already have spoken with the bank, I said, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. I am the bank. I bought the debt, David. The house is mine now. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Laura sobbing dramatically in the background. I imagined my father standing in the foyer, the letter trembling in his hand, the world he had built with her collapsing around him. You bought it? He finally whispered, the words full of disbelief. Why? Why would you do this to us? To your own family? You stopped being my family on a Tuesday in October when you let your wife throw me out with a single suitcase? I replied, the words sharp and precise. You chose her. You chose this house. And you chose to stand there and do nothing while your daughter was put on the street. Every choice has a consequence, David. You taught me that. I didn't know what to do, he pleaded, his voice weak and pathetic. Laura, she can be very persuasive. I thought it would be better for you to be more independent. The excuse was so feeble, so transparent, that a bitter laugh almost escaped my lips. He wasn't just weak, he was a coward. He had rewritten history in his own mind to absolve himself of guilt. Better for me? I asked, my voice dangerously low. I slept in my car for 2 weeks until I saved enough money from my waitressing job for a security deposit on a room. I worked 2 jobs all through college. I ate ramen noodles and wore second-hand clothes. And not once, in all those years, did you ever call to see if I was okay. Do not tell me you did this for my benefit. He was crying now. Soft, gulping sobs. I'm so sorry, Emma. I am so sorry. Please, don't take the house. It's all we have. It's where you grew up. Yes, it is, I said softly. And now I'm taking it back. You have 72 hours, David. I suggest you start packing. I ended the call before he could say another word. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness. It was the adrenaline of a battle finally fought and won. As I drove away, I looked at the house one last time in my rearview mirror. The lights were on, illuminating the scene of my past pain. But it wasn't their house anymore. It was just a property, an asset, and I was coming to collect. The silence in my car after the call was heavier than any sound. For a moment, I just sat there, parked on the side of the road a few blocks away, my knuckles still white on the steering wheel. The shaking in my hands subsided, replaced by an unnerving calm. I had expected to feel a storm of emotions, grief, anger, maybe even a sliver of regret. But there was nothing. It was like looking at a ledger where a long overdue debt had finally been marked as paid. The transaction was complete. My phone buzzed again. It was Laura. I ignored it. It buzzed a second, a third, a fourth time. Then a string of text messages began to pour in. I glanced at the first one. It was a long paragraph of insults, calling me ungrateful, cruel, a monster. I deleted the entire thread without reading the rest and blocked her number. Then I blocked my father's. There would be no more emotional appeals, no more attempts to rewrite history. From this point forward, all communication would be handled by professionals. I called my lawyer, Richard. He was a calm, methodical man in his 50s who specialized in real estate law. "Emma," he said, his voice even. "I assume the call has been made?" "It has," I confirmed. "They know. Laura tried to call me multiple times." "I expected as much," Richard said. "I advise you not to engage. They have the official 72-hour notice. They may try to file an emergency stay, but given the months of non-payment, no judge will grant it. The process is ironclad." "Good," I said. "What's next?" "Now, we wait for the deadline to expire. I have a team on standby to secure the property at precisely 9 a.m. on Friday. You don't have to be there if you don't want to." "Oh, I'll be there," I said, a firmness in my voice that surprised even me. "I need to be there." Richard paused for a second. "As you wish. Just stay in your car. Let my team handle everything. People can be unpredictable in these situations." The next day, Laura escalated her attack. She took to social media. She posted old photos of me with my dad, smiling on birthdays and holidays from before she was in the picture. Her caption was a masterpiece of manipulation. She wrote about a heartbroken father and a troubled, vindictive daughter who had come into money and was now using it to destroy her own family out of spite. She didn't mention the 6 months of missed payments or the fact she'd kicked a 16-year-old out of the house. She painted herself as the victim, the loving wife trying to protect her home from a cruel stepdaughter. I saw the post because a few old high school acquaintances sent it to me, asking if I was okay. The comments were a mix of sympathy for Laura and condemnation for the anonymous daughter. It stung for a moment, the public shaming. But then I remembered sleeping in my Honda Civic, the cold seeping through the windows. I remembered studying for finals under the dim light of a gas station. Laura's online drama was nothing compared to that. It was just noise. On the final day, the day before the eviction, I got an email from an unknown address. The subject line was, "Please." It was from my dad. He must have created a new account just to reach me. It wasn't angry like Laura's messages. It was just sad. He wrote about my mother, about how much she loved that house, how he saw her in every room. He attached a photo of me as a little girl, maybe 5 years old, sitting on his shoulders in the front yard, a huge smile on my face. He wrote, "This was our home, Emma. Your home. Don't let your anger erase all the good memories. What would your mother think?" That was his final, desperate move, using my dead mother against me. For years, I had wondered that same thing. What would she think? Would she be ashamed of me? But as I looked at that photo, I didn't feel guilt. I felt a profound sadness for that little girl who believed her father was a hero who could protect her from anything. He had failed that little girl. He had failed my mother's memory the moment he stood by and let Laura cross that threshold. My anger hadn't erased the good memories. He had. He had allowed a stranger to tarnish them, to paint over them with her own selfish desires. I deleted the email and shut my laptop. The 72 hours were almost up. I slept soundly that night for the first time in a long time. The next morning, I got dressed in a simple black pantsuit. It felt like armor. At 8:45 a.m., I was parked across the street from the house. Richard's team, 2 stoic men in uniforms, were in an unmarked van behind me. A single moving truck was parked at the curb, but it was empty. The front door of the house was closed. My father and Laura were standing on the front lawn, not with boxes, but with their arms crossed, waiting. They weren't leaving. They were preparing for a final stand. And they were waiting for me. At 9 a.m. on the dot, the doors of the unmarked van opened. The The two men from Richard's team stepped out. They were not imposing, just professional. They carried clipboards and wore simple dark blue uniforms that bore no company logo. They moved with a calm efficiency that was far more intimidating than any show of force. They didn't look at me. They didn't look at Laura or my father. They looked at the house, their objective. As they started walking up the driveway, Laura's act began. Her posture changed from defiant to tragically victimized. She threw her hands up in the air. "Can you believe this?" she shouted, her voice projecting for any curious neighbors who might be peering through their blinds. "After everything we've done for her, we gave her a home, and this is how she repays us, by throwing her own father out on the street." My father, David, just stood there, his shoulders slumped. He looked smaller than ever on the perfectly manicured lawn he could no longer afford. He didn't speak. He just let Laura's voice fill the quiet morning air, his silence a form of agreement. One of the men, the taller of the two, stopped a few feet from them. He didn't engage with her hysterics. He simply looked at his clipboard. "David Clark?" he asked, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. My father flinched at the sound of his full name. He gave a small, defeated nod. "And you are Laura Clark?" the man asked, glancing at her. "You know who I am," she snapped. "You're her hired thugs." The man didn't react. "We are here on behalf of the property owner to execute a legal eviction. The 72-hour notice period has expired. You are required to vacate the premises immediately." "This is our home," Laura shrieked, taking a step forward. "This is a family home. You can't just—" "Ma'am," the second man said, speaking for the first time. His voice was even calmer than his partner's. "The mortgage was legally purchased. The payments were not made. The eviction is lawful. A sheriff's deputy is on his way to oversee the process. You can leave voluntarily or you can be removed for trespassing." The mention of a sheriff seemed to momentarily stun her into silence. In that brief pause, my father finally looked at me, his eyes pleading across the street. He took a shaky step forward, away from Laura. "Emma," he called out, his voice cracking. "Please, don't do this. Think of your mother. Think of the memories." That was it. I couldn't stay in the car anymore. I opened the door and stepped out, my black pantsuit feeling less like armor and more like a uniform. I walked slowly, deliberately, across the street. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I felt the eyes of my father and Laura on me with every step. I felt the professional indifference of Richard's men. I stopped on the public sidewalk, not setting foot on the lawn. Not yet. I looked directly at my father. "I have thought about her," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I've thought about her every single day for the last 10 years. And I think she would be heartbroken to see what you let this house become. What you let yourself become." I then turned my gaze to Laura, who was staring at me with pure hatred. "You said this house wasn't big enough for my teenage drama," I said, quoting her own words back to her. "You were right. It was never big enough for your greed either. But now it's just right for me." Laura opened her mouth to scream another insult, but at that exact moment, a patrol car pulled up to the curb. A uniformed deputy stepped out, his hand resting casually on his belt. He nodded at Richard's men, then looked at my father and Laura. His presence changed everything. It was no longer a family drama. It was a legal procedure. "Folks," the deputy said, his tone suggesting he'd done this 100 times. "I'm just here to keep the peace. These gentlemen have the paperwork. The easiest thing for everyone is to just cooperate." Laura deflated. The fight went out of her. She looked at the deputy, then at the men with their clipboards, then at me. She saw an unbreakable wall of law and consequence that her theatrics couldn't breach. My father started to cry again, silent tears rolling down his face. "Our things," he mumbled, his voice thick. "We haven't packed everything." The taller man from Richard's team spoke. "You have 1 hour to remove your personal effects. Anything left behind after that will be considered abandoned and will be disposed of." He pointed to the empty moving truck. "That truck is not for you. It's for us." The reality of it finally crashed down on them. They hadn't believed it would happen. They thought their last-minute appeals, their performance of victimhood, would work. They thought I would break. But I hadn't. I watched as the two men walked past them and unlocked the front door with a key I had given them. The click of the lock echoed across the lawn. It was the sound of the end for them and the sound of a new beginning for me. Laura let out a choked sob and finally stumbled toward the house, my father following her like a lost child. They were going inside, not to fight, but to frantically grab what they could in their final hour. They were no longer defiant homeowners. They were trespassers on a time limit. I stayed on the sidewalk, a silent observer to the collapse of their world. I didn't feel the surge of triumph I had expected. Instead, a strange, hollow quietness settled in my chest. From my vantage point, I could see through the large living room window as they scrambled. It was a chaotic, desperate dance. Laura was a whirlwind of frantic energy, yanking designer dresses from the closet, stuffing jewelry into a handbag. Her movements were sharp, angry, as if she was fighting the very air in the house. She wasn't packing memories. She was salvaging assets. My father, David, moved like he was underwater. Slow, heavy, lost. He wasn't gathering expensive things. I saw him carefully take down framed pictures from the wall. One of them was of my mom and me at a park, a picture I thought Laura would have thrown out years ago. He wrapped it carefully in a sweater before placing it in a cardboard box. He picked up small, meaningless objects. A clay bird I made in 3rd grade, the chipped coffee mug he'd been holding earlier. He was trying to pack a life that had ended long ago. The hour passed in what felt like both an eternity and a single moment. The deputy stood by his car, a calm, official presence that prevented any more outbursts. Richard's men directed the professional movers who were now emptying the house of the furniture, which was legally mine as part of the property's assets. Laura and David were only allowed their personal belongings. They dragged their few boxes and overstuffed suitcases onto the lawn, creating a sad little pile of their life on the manicured grass. Their BMW was gone. In its place was a small, rented sedan that looked comically inadequate for their pile of belongings. They struggled to fit everything inside, Laura shoving a Louis Vuitton bag next to a box of old towels with a grunt of frustration. Once the car was packed to the brim, my father turned and looked at me one last time. His face was a wreck of shame and sorrow. "Emma," he said, his voice barely a whisper across the distance. "I'm so sorry. I was weak. I let you down." Laura shot him a look of pure poison. "Don't you dare apologize to her, David. She did this to us." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "I hope you're happy. I hope you rot in this empty house all alone." I didn't respond to her. I just looked at my father. For the first time, I didn't see the man who abandoned me. I saw a broken man who had made a terrible mistake and had been paying for it ever since. The anger I had held onto for a decade finally loosened its grip. It didn't vanish, but it transformed into something else. Pity. "I know," I said to him, my voice soft but firm, just for him to hear. "Goodbye, Dad." That was all. I turned my back on them before they could say another word. I heard a car door slam, the engine start, and the sound of tires pulling away from the curb. I didn't look back. I stood there until the sound of their car faded completely, leaving only the rustle of leaves in the autumn wind. One of Richard's men, the taller one, walked over to me. "It's done, Ms. Evans," he said, holding out a set of keys. "The property is yours." I took the keys. They felt heavy in my palm. I walked up the stone path, the same path I had been thrown out of, and I put the key in the lock. It turned smoothly. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was cavernous and empty. The movers had been efficient. Indentations in the carpet were all that remained of the furniture. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunbeams slanting through the windows. It smelled of lemon cleaner and old regrets. Every footstep echoed. I walked from room to room. I saw the ghost of my childhood in the faint scratches on the floorboards and the height chart my mom had penciled onto a doorframe. I saw the ghost of their life in the empty spaces where Laura's vanity and my father's armchair used to be. In the kitchen, on the cold granite countertop, sat a single object, the chipped coffee mug. My father must have left it behind in his haste. I picked it up. It was the one with a cartoon dog on it that said, "World's Best Dad." I had given it to him for his birthday when I was 7. I held it for a long moment, the cold ceramic warming in my hands. Laura was wrong. I wasn't going to be alone in this house. But I wasn't going to live here either. This place wasn't a home anymore. It was a museum of pain. Reclaiming it wasn't about moving back in. It was about having the power to finally close the door. I walked back to the front door carrying the mug with me. I looked out at the quiet, tree-lined street. I was 26 years old. I had a life, a career, a future that I had built from nothing. I didn't need this house. I just needed to know that I could have it. I called my lawyer, Richard. "It's done," I said. "Put the house on the market. I want it sold by the end of the month." After I hung up, I walked to the recycling bin at the curb and gently placed the chipped mug inside. I didn't smash it. I just let it go. Then I locked the door to that empty house one last time and walked away without looking back, feeling the crisp autumn air on my face, finally, truly, on my own 2 feet. And for the first time, it felt like freedom. From a suitcase on the curb to owning their mortgage, I got my revenge. He's evicted, and I finally closed that door. What did you think of my final act? Subscribe for more stories of justice served.